Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we are going to be testing out the new Huda Beauty Icy Nude eyeshadow palette. So this is her holiday launch for 2024. This palette is said to be her last large eyeshadow palette. I hope that just means that they are going to be sticking with their 9 pans going forward, but I am still really sad about that because I absolutely love looking forward to these large palettes every holiday season. So I am really sad that this is going to be the last one. So this palette retails for $69 US or 94 Canadian. I believe this is launching for early access on the Sephora app on October 25th, but Sephora Canada did release this one a little bit early, so that is how I have mine. So this palette does have a 24-month shelf life and is made in Italy, much like all of her other larger eyeshadow palettes. I do hope that if she is sticking with the 9 pans going forward, she is at least going to switch to her Italian formula because the formulas in here are usually pretty phenomenal. So we can see the box is actually kind of plain looking. It's not really what I expected from the Icy Nude. And we can see she has definitely rebranded her logo up here. I do like the new logo quite a bit, but the inner palette is beautiful. So we do have this hard plastic packaging. It is silver all along the edges, and we do have this silver raised lettering. It's really, really beautiful, very heavy. And on the back, we do have a silver sort of label here, and it does say, Icy Nude is taking staples to new levels. This modern wearable palette is packed with matte shadows in shades of nudes, browns, grays, and pinks, contrasting against icy and sparkly pinks and silvers, a multi-chromatic white, and a platinum biodegradable glitter eye topper for that extra attitude. This palette does sound amazing. So opening her up, you do get that standard large mirror over here, and then this is our color story. So it is a very, very pretty color story. I am quite excited about this one. So these colors are definitely something I'm going to be reaching for. I will say the last 2 years we had Empowered and we had Pretty Grunge. And when I initially saw those palettes, I thought there is no way in the world I am going to reach for either of those. I did skip the Empowered palette and then I received the Alter Ego alternative and I absolutely loved it. So then last year I picked up Pretty Grunge and it actually became one of my absolute favorite Huda palettes. So this year when I initially saw this color story, I wasn't at all deterred by it. I wasn't worried about it. It seems like a very, very approachable color story. So I think what we're going to do is we are going to create 3 different looks. I'll do one on each eye, take them off, and then create a third and final look to wear for the rest of the day. And then I will show you some comparisons toward the end. But before we do that, let's take a look at some swatches. All right, going left to right, I did have a lot of trouble getting all of these shades on my arm. So the first shade is Iced Out, which is that multi-chromatic white shimmer. It is very, very beautiful. It's white. It has a shift of sort of blue, but purple in there as well. It's a very pretty shade. Then we have High Life, Platinum, Unapologetic, Faux Fur, and Gold Standards. Getting into that second row, we have Avalanche, Aurora, VVS, Poised, She Rich, and Cold Plunge. Getting into that final row, we have IDGAF, Bling, which Bling is definitely going to be that sparkle topper that she mentioned. The feel of this one is very gritty. I really do not like the feel of this one. But like I said, this is definitely going to be a topper. You can see from my swatches that it really doesn't have any sort of base to it. Then we have Oneself. Diamond Dew is a beautiful, beautiful shade. Then we have Lavish and First Class. So I do say this every time, but Huda Beauty is truly the queen of texture. And this is part of why I'm a little anxious about her moving away from her large palettes and praying that she's going to be using her Italian formula in her 9 pans, because I really do believe that she is the queen of texture. She's not afraid to play with different ones. There is the occasional flop, but when she gets it right, she really gets it right. And she definitely gets it right more than she gets it wrong. So she does have a lot of my favorite shimmer formulas. So let me zoom you in and we can start creating 3 different looks. All right, so I think for the first look, I want to play with those more pinky tones a little bit. So I am going to start with the shade Lavish. I do just have some concealer and powder on my lids and just blending this shade all through the crease and in that outer corner a little bit. I don't normally have an issue with her matte formula. I find with her larger palettes, there often is maybe one shade in the palette that I'll just never use. And I feel like if I had to figure out what shade that would be, it would definitely be that very, very dry glitter topper. But at the same time, I think I already know a place for it. So that's kind of nice when thinking about this one, because there might not be a single neglected shade in this palette, because even though I love all of her larger palettes that I have, there are definitely some that are on the more neglected side. Okay, I think I might go into Unapologetic. And I do want this to be my outer corner shade. So blending into that pink a little bit. And then sort of blending up into the crease. I don't use this brush nearly enough. Every time I use it, I think about how much I like it, and then I forget to use it again. This is the Sonia G Small Worker brush. It's really nice. Okay, just to deepen that up a little bit, I think I want to go into Faux Fur right here and just placing that on the outer corner, kind of stamping it in there. I'm not having a single issue with these mattes. I wasn't expecting to, but I'm definitely not having a single issue. All right, so I'm really liking how our base is looking. I'm going to go into the shade Aurora. I am going to pick that up with a finger. I know Huda said on her Instagram that she did create a lot of her looks with her finger, so I'm thinking that's probably just the way to go. I also noted that a lot of these shimmers feel quite creamy, and that is definitely just how I prefer to apply my shimmers as well. That's a beautiful, beautiful pink. Okay, I am going to have to blend those edges. All right, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful pink. I do want to go into VVS next. That's the one right beside it, because this also seemed to have a pink shift. And I think this shade would be so beautiful on that very inner portion of the lid. Oh, that is pretty. Okay. That does look really pretty. I am going to take a smaller pencil brush and I'm just going to go into Avalanche right here, just this really bright white for that inner corner. That is super, super pretty. I really like that. I love that white on the inner corner. Okay, let me pop off camera. I'm going to pop on some mascara and then I'll come back to show you the finished look number 1 before we get into look number 2. All right, so here is the finished look number 1, and I really do like it. I do think it's really, really pretty. And I love how we've got that pink to it, but then it kind of goes into this super white inner corner. I forgot how pretty a white inner corner can be. Let's get into look number 2, and I think we are going to play with these more silver shades in the palette. So I'm just gonna start with the shade Oneself, and I'm just gonna blend this one in the crease and kind of just haphazardly all over the lid. So I was also going to create a brown look with this palette, but honestly, looking at the palette, I'm getting so many different ideas of other things I want to do. So I might skip that classic brown look I would usually do today, and I can probably create that for like a short or something, but that is a good sign when I'm too excited with different things that I want to do with this palette. That's always a very good sign. Okay, from there, I'm going to go into Poised. And this is also going to be outer corner and crease. And I'm going to try to build it up quite a bit on that outer corner. I like this shade a lot, actually, because blended out in the crease, it's nice and subtle, but you can also just really build it up in that outer corner to get that depth. I love when a matte shade performs in that way. All right, so I got a really nice base just from that matte alone. I think from there, I want to go into the shade Platinum, and I want to start by putting this one kind of all over the lid, getting into that. It looks really, really nice over that matte shade as well. This is a really, really nice shimmer. It's quite creamy, so it adheres to the lid very, very well. And I feel like it's not one that's going to wear off super quickly. So I got a little bit of fallout, but again, not too bad. This one really isn't quite as textured as the ones on the other side. I'm just deciding if I want to go into Diamond Dew or if I want to go into this one right here. Maybe I'll try to pick up a little bit. I've just picked up a little bit of that on a finger, and I'm gonna sort of place it right in the center. Okay, it does add a really, really pretty sparkle. Okay, that does add a really, really lovely sparkle. I don't know if that's really picking up on camera, but it definitely does add a really, really beautiful amount of sparkle. Again, it does still feel very dry, so that sort of topper situation is definitely what that's going to be used for, but it definitely does add a really pretty sparkle to the lids. So I think now I'm going to go into Diamond Dew because of course I can't just stop there. And this shade is pretty foiled, pretty textured. We're expecting a lot of fallout, but I do want this one more toward the inner portion of the lid and blended up. And like I said, this one is very, very foiled. And it comes off like a lighter silver. And it's very, very reflective. Okay, that's really pretty as well. And like I guessed, I definitely got a lot of fallout. That foiled shade is one that I would probably warm up between my fingers before putting on the lids. That way I still get that high shine, but I don't get all the fallout and the texture. But otherwise, I think that looks quite lovely. I am going to go back into that matte white though for that inner corner because I loved the way that looks. And that really just adds to that super icy look. This palette would have been so good for the cold girl trend that went around last year, the year before. It might come back this year, but this would have been perfect for that. Okay, let me pop off camera, pop on some mascara, and I'll come back to show you the finished look number 2, and then we'll get into look number 3. All right, so here is the finished look number 2. So both of the first 2 looks I really, really like. I love the pink, I always do, but this more silver look I really do like, and I like how it went really, really icy with that last shimmer I put on top. This one actually would be quite pretty with a deeper outer corner, maybe one of those more purple leaning mattes. I think that still would be very, very pretty. For the purposes of this look, I like that I just kept it with the gray, but I still do think this is really pretty. Let's get into look number 3 and then we can get into some comparisons. So getting into the third and final look, I am going to start with Oneself again. I really, really like this one, especially for what I want to do for my final look. Like I said, I was planning to go into those browns as I normally would, but I did have another idea, and it is definitely inspired by a look Huda was wearing in one of her reveal videos. So I'm going to do that. It will definitely not be a perfect replica of what she did, but I want to try anyway. Okay, I think I'm going to go into High Life. High Life and Lavish are honestly quite similar even when you look at the swatches. Okay, just blending this one up into that crease. And outer corner, just starting to shape the eye. Like I said, I am genuinely really, really sad that this is her last large palette. She did say it's their last large palette ever. That might be a bit of a tall statement. I mean, I know that we're not really buying large palettes right now. That's really not the trend. But it always does swing back, and there will be a time when people are wanting large palettes again. So I don't know, maybe it won't be their very last. Maybe they will again someday. But she hasn't really elaborated much other than to say it's the last one, which I mean I guess is to have people talking and create speculation, but I don't know. I'm interested to see what they do. I hope they sort of improve on their 9 pans. They have had some really good 9 pans. It's just that they're a little bit more hit or miss, whereas the larger palettes are always kind of a hit. So I think Huda actually went into Unapologetic as well, just based on the photo. So I'm going to sort of put this one in the outer corner and sort of blend that up as well. This shade almost seems a little bit more warm to me, but not in the way that it's clashing, just that it's adding a little bit of life back. So I'm going to take the shade Avalanche now, and I want to pack this one all over the lid. I still have a little bit of shimmer in the corner from the last two looks, but that's okay. It's going to get covered. Again, just packing this sort of all over and then into the crease just to where it would meet those other shades, and then making sure it's sort of reinforced in that inner corner. I actually kind of like that as a matte look. Okay, I'm gonna pick up the shade Iced Out on a finger, and this one I'm going to pat on that inner portion of the lid. And then just blending that up a little bit. I think I may have liked that look more before I added that white duochrome. Interesting. Same thing on this side. It's definitely very reflective and very, very interesting. But for the sake of curiosity, I think I might add a little bit of that super sparkly shade right here, just a little bit, and sort of pat this. That did add a bit of a sparkle. I don't know that it was necessary. I don't know if I would necessarily do it again, but I do have to do the same thing on the other side. And this does seem to be more of a silver sparkle, but like I said, it doesn't really have a base to it, so it's not really going to add much color. Okay, let me clean this up a little bit and then I can zoom you out and we can get into some comparisons. All right, so here is that finished final look number 3. Like I said, it wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but it turned out okay. It's cute enough. Let me zoom you out and we can get into some comparisons and final thoughts. I do absolutely love this color story. I think it's stunning. I think the palette itself is absolutely beautiful. I do think there are still quite a few things I'd love to try doing with this palette, and that's a really, really good sign. And I would say the one shade that I do think is kind of a dud, which is just the sparkle, really isn't a dud because I actually can use it as that sparkle topper, which it's intended to do. I just don't like how it feels. It's very much a texture thing for me. Now, I did pull out some palettes to show you some comparisons. And the first palette I thought of, mostly because of these cool tone pinks and purples in here, was the Rose Quartz palette. Side by side, you can kind of see that. I do think Rose Quartz definitely has a little bit more of a purple element, a little less silver, a little less icy. We do have one of those really weird gel shades right in the middle. And popping up the swatches, there was about 9 shades that I found relatively similar. So that is half the palette. The mattes in particular, I was able to get pretty similar. I will say if you do have Rose Quartz, you might be able to get some pretty similar looks. You're not going to be able to go into those icy whites and silvers, but you will be able to get some similar looks. The look I have on right now, I definitely think you could create something very, very similar with Rose Quartz. So I do think it's surprisingly similar that some of the mattes almost look 100% shade for shade dupes. It looks like they're just repeated shades with different names, which I kind of found interesting. I found sort of a similar situation when I went into Mercury Retrograde. I find obviously Mercury Retrograde definitely looks much more spring and fun. We have a lot more brighter purples. We have some brighter blues. Those two whites I thought were going to be very similar, but they weren't quite as similar as I suspected. In texture, identical, but the way they swatch a little bit different. They do have slightly different shifts. And then you can see I got some similar shimmer shades from Mercury Retrograde. I also did get some similar mattes as well. So it definitely sort of felt like she was repeating prior shades in some ways. Next to Pretty Grunge, I mean, Pretty Grunge really kind of brought out those silver tones that we didn't get from the last two that I mentioned, but it is deeper, darker, grungier. But I do sort of feel like Icy Nude is the lighter sister to Pretty Grunge in many ways, especially because we can get into those silver, very, very textured looks with Pretty Grunge. So in looking at those 3 palettes, I feel like if you have those 3, you could almost skip Icy Nude. I think this palette in this color story is absolutely stunning, but I do think if you have those first three that I mentioned, you might be able to safely skip this one. Just because they each pulled in some different elements. The rose quartz really hit us with those mattes. The Mercury retrograde really got us with some of those pinky shimmers, and then Pretty Grunge came out with some of those silvers that we have in here. So I feel like between the three of them, they kind of do cover off this palette. I also thought about the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes, just for those nude tones and those very, very sparkly shades. Obviously, we're not getting a ton of similarities. The Mario doesn't give us those silvers, and it doesn't really have any sort of purple elements, but I did notice with the mattes and a couple of the shimmers there were similarities. I think they're different enough to not really be considered related. I did look at the new Moonlight palette, and I really don't think there's a lot of similarity there as well. I really just sort of pulled the Moonlight palette because of these very cool tone mattes. And the mattes maybe, but otherwise they're really not very similar either. I did also look at the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude because I feel like they definitely give a very similar vibe. They both lean into those cool tones, but the Huda definitely leans into those icier tones a little bit more. We definitely have more pops of silver and white in here, so we're going a little bit more intense, whereas this one is just a perfect nude. You will be able to get some of these more nude shades with the Huda as well. You don't have to go with the full glam. You could definitely keep it pretty neutral with these browns down here. Like I said, I was going to play with these browns today, but there was just so many things I wanted to try with the palette that I didn't necessarily. But even the all matte look I had going on before I put on that icy white shimmer that actually looks more purple now, I really, really love that look. So Huda is definitely going to give you a little bit more full glam, a lot more shine, a lot more sparkle, but you will be able to create some relatively similar looks. This one is definitely going to be a better day-to-day, everyday, less intense shimmer palette. This one's going to be a little bit more intense and icy, but I can definitely see the similar vibe. Overall, for her final large eyeshadow palette, I do think this is beautiful. I love the icy theme. I love, love, love the color story. This is a very, very me color story. This is definitely directly right in my comfort zone, and I really do love it. I think it's absolutely beautiful. Do I think it's an absolute need? No. Particularly if you have the first three Huda palettes that I mentioned. I just think if you have a larger Huda Beauty collection, particularly with her larger palettes, then you probably can skip this one because it does sort of feel like she duped herself a lot. I do not have the Empowered palette, and I don't have the Naughty palette. I feel like if I had those, it would probably round this out completely. While I think this is super beautiful, we don't really have a lot of new shades. I feel like some of them, like I said, are repeat shades. This shade here is really, really pretty. It wasn't as sparkly as I thought it was. This one, it's called Bling, and that's kind of appropriate. Like I said, I don't like the texture of it. It's just very, very dry, but that's because it's literally just a glitter topper. There's really no base to it. So it really is just meant to add some shine and sparkle. I think it's pretty. I don't think it's necessary, but I like that the one shade in here that I don't like is one that I'm going to use. In previous years, we've had that shade that looks like a petri dish. We've had an eye gloss, and none of which I ever use. So this one I might actually reach for. So overall, I do love this color story. I can see myself getting a ton of use out of this palette, especially going into those winter months. I can definitely see myself really, really loving this one. And like I said, I only wanted to create 3 looks today, but I can definitely see so many other looks in this palette that I want to try to do. So that is a very good sign. That definitely tells me that I am very inspired by this palette, as I usually am by Huda's palettes. However, like I said, I do kind of feel like she pulled a lot of elements from her previous palettes and just put them in here, because I really do feel like if you have these 3, you might be able to create a lot of very similar looks. So just keep that in mind. I think it's really, really beautiful, and if you are wanting this one, then the Sephora savings event is going to be the perfect time to pick it up. I do love that she's releasing it right before the sale. I do really love and respect that. But again, it's one of those things, I think if you want it, I don't think you'll be disappointed because it's beautiful and the textures are gorgeous and the formula did not miss. But if you do have a lot of Huda's larger palettes, you might already be able to create something similar and you might be able to safely skip this one. So it really depends on your own collection, but I really love it and I think it's a beautiful, beautiful palette, and I will definitely be reaching for this a ton. But that is it for me today. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload new videos every single week. The next video you're going to see is going to be the Natasha Denona Rocks the palette. They actually both came in at the exact same day, but the Huda came in 30 minutes earlier. So stay tuned for that if you're interested, but thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!